started. It's
Sure.
1:20 already, so let's get started.
Cool. Okay, go ahead, Mira.
Yeah, so just some housekeeping to start with. If you need subtitles, please enable them in Chrome. Instructions are on the top of the chat. And if you have any questions, please write them into Q&A tab, and we will try to answer them in the end of the session. Thank you all for coming, and welcome to our session, Building Decoupled Informational Web for the Czech government. As you probably noticed, the last year was quite extraordinary, and Czechia wasn't an exception. So the Czech government at some point reached to Czech Drupal community and asked them to help them build informational web to inform people about current situation with COVID and in Czech Republic. In this presentation, we will talk about who, why, and in the end, how built this website. First, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Miro Michalička. I'm from Slovakia, and I'm Drupal and Devops engineer at Tropico, and I also try to help people in Czech and Slovak Drupal communities.
And hi, I'm Marek Vantuch. I guess I can call myself a Drupal architect, and to give you a bit more information about myself, what's taking up most of the time at this point is my 3-month-old son. So if you hear some weird noises, it's him.
Yeah. So it obviously wasn't us who came up with this idea. As I already said, Czech government reached out to us, and Dominic Ferry is the one who came up with this idea as the first one. And from his power, he was also able to get some political support. He reached out to Czech Drupal, who are NGO and community of professionals trying to improve e-government and usage of IT in everyday life in general in Czechia. And for the government part, there was also some involvement of NAKIT, who are National Agency for Communication and Information Technologies, which basically means that they are running all government services, and they maintain them, they develop them. From the Czech and Slovak Drupal communities, it was me and Marek mostly involved. Then also Peter, who helped us with some front-end. And also Karel, Vít, and Luděk helped us with some important parts in this project. Now move to why we needed this site in the first place. Let me illustrate this on example of COVID situation in Czechia in November 2020. Czechia was one of the global leaders in new cases. There was around 20,000 cases per day, which is, in my opinion, quite a lot for 10 million population. Related issue was that hospitals and especially ICUs and ventilated beds were filling up pretty fast. And on the top of that, government was issuing new measures and was failing to communicate them clearly to all people. So goals for this project were, in the first place, we had to make government communication more clear, more transparent, and for normal people, it's quite hard to keep up with these measures, and it's hard to read this lawyerish. So we also wanted to apply these measures to everyday situations. So if you are organizing wedding, you know how many people can you invite, or even if you can have catering at that wedding. And this is just to make rules easy to understand for everyone. From technical point, we and Czech Drupal wanted to use open source, and we also wanted to keep everything open and available on so anyone can download it. we were also expecting that there is a lot of people interested in knowing what they can and can't do. So we had to be able to scale up based on the demand. And because we were hosting on government cloud, we also had to use security of some standards. This was mostly because when there was some community project in the past, there were a lot of wannabe hackers who were trying to hack that. And the last technical goal was to have whole site multilingual, because there is a lot of minorities living in Czech Republic, so it was just a logical step. And on the top of that, we just had to do it in 2 weeks.
The 2 weeks was from the beginning when the Dominic announced it until it was supposed to be live. So for us to do the development, it was more like a week or just 10 days.
Yeah. Now let's talk about how finally. Let me give you some high-level architecture. We are at DrupalCon, so it's pretty obvious that we decided to use Drupal 9 for backend. With Drupal, we wanted to stick to core modules. We didn't want to introduce a lot of contribs because we wanted the system to be as stable as possible. And for frontend, we decided to use Gatsby.js. For those who doesn't know Gatsby, it's blazing fast React.js framework, and it can produce static output, so it should be pretty secure because you can't hack HTML files. We decided to use Gatsby for mostly 2 reasons. The first reason was that we already had some previous experience that us as a Drupal team and also front-end team from the community. And the second reason was that there is also already quite good integration between Drupal and Gatsby, but I will get to that part later. As for the hosting, we just had to be able to scale. So it was no-brainer that we picked cloud hosting. It was also offering from the government that they have some space somewhere in cloud, and we are able to use it if we don't increase the cost too much.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up from Miro for a second. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the way we have built the system. Since we've mentioned that we only had 2 weeks or even less, we needed to make sure that the whole platform is going to be quite easy and quite standard, and that we're not going to be facing any big issues within that time, because there would simply be not much time to resolve that. So we wanted to do sort of an MVP implementation, and we really wanted to focus on the live situations and the measures and the stuff around them, really. So there was some kind of categorization of the live situations and the same for the measures. And also we wanted to be able to sort of limit the measures and live situations per region, because at that point, we didn't really know what was going to happen in the country. We didn't really know if, for example, one of the regions of Czech Republic would only have something limited or anything like that. In the end, we didn't really have to use it, but we just wanted to have the architecture of the system sort of ready for this situation as well. Another thing which we were considering a lot is paragraphs, and I'm going to get into it a little bit in the next slide. Because for the live situations, we wanted to give the people the questions and the answers. And this is just to give you an idea of the questions we needed to ask or the problems we had to solve within the first days or hours of when we were working on the project. The problem is when you have paragraphs, and I love paragraphs, it's a great module and it gives you an ability to really quickly build up entities within the system. And it would be really easy to make this kind of question answer paragraph, to add it into content. and to display it. But the problem is, it doesn't really work well with multilingual. When you try to translate the paragraphs from one language to another, you need to keep the same number of items, because otherwise it's just not really built for that. There is a module which is supposed to fix that, but we just weren't really sure about it, and we didn't have the time for the Gov't. So instead of using the paragraphs, which would have been faster in the beginning, we have decided to implement custom fields, so to define them ourselves. And we were sure that the custom fields are going to work just fine, and we're not going to be facing any unforeseen trouble. What we also wanted to focus on was the administration interface. Even with the limitations of the time, we still knew that it was going to be essential for the people who are going to be working with the platform to have the tools easy to use. So we have built like a custom views and custom administration within the toolbar so that everything is available at a single click. You can see at the top, I'm sorry for the language, it's in Czech, but we didn't really have the time to translate the administration into English as well, to be fair with you. But at least it was all available, only the pages which the user was able to use, the editor, we had them available only at the top. So they didn't have to go into the structure, into the content or anything. It was really easy. And we got some really good feedback from the administrators after it was live in the end as well. We had two kind of roles, or three in the end, for the people who were working on this. And one was editor, and then there was like a corrector, so that they would be able to switch the things between themselves. And we had some kind of workflow for the content to be able to get to the front page as well. And we also wanted to make sure that there's going to be preview. The problem with the fact that we were decoupled was that there was no easy way of implementing preview directly in the decoupled front ends. I mean, it's possible, but we simply didn't have the time. So we at least wanted to give them, and that was Peter's deed, that we wanted to give them at least some kind of visual representation of the data they were inputting into the system. And that was it. It's very basic, but for them, that was all they really needed. They just wanted to see what they put in and what they're gonna see on the front end once it gets live. And another thing which is a bit of a trouble with the decoupled, and there's another presentation about this at this time, I believe. So if you want to know a bit more about it, you might want to see it. But that doesn't mean that you want to leave this presentation, right? You still want to stay here. But maybe you want to watch it from the recording. But what we had to do is there's a bit of a problem with the translation in Drupal. And that's when you change the original translation in English, you need to translate everything into Czech again. So, and also to get the translations into the front end is actually a bit complicated, because translations aren't entities. So they don't get representation in the JSON APIs and therefore not in Gatsby. So what we did, we built a really simple custom entity to accommodate for that. It was an entity with source and then destinations, and we just put all the texts in there, and it was working. It was really fast to implement, and it was working pretty well for us as well. That said, nothing goes as planned, right? So we built this system, and we found out that the government announced a new system, which is called PES, which means like anti-epidemics system. And there's 5 levels when you can switch from the green to yellow, orange, red, and purple, or 1 till 5. And each of those levels sort of defines how severe the sickness spreading in the country is. And that caused that there were several defined rules, and several rules like restrictions and measures for each of those levels. So we had to extend the system so that it would support automatic switching between the levels, so that the editors wouldn't have to rewrite everything again and again and again, because there was an expectation that those levels are going to be switching quite often, and they did for a certain time. And I'm handing over back to Miro, who's going to give you more information on the technical part.
Yeah, so let's talk a bit about Gatsby. As I mentioned earlier, for backend we are using Drupal 9, for frontend we are using Gatsby. And because we wanted to use only core or minimum of country modules, we decided to use Json Api. Json Api is in core, it's stable, so it was pretty good choice. And Gatsby.js has plugin which is able to fetch data from Json Api. There was one issue with this plugin. The plugin doesn't support multilingual content yet, but there is patch for it. So we had to use that patch, which doesn't sound like a big deal for Drupal people because we are using patches every day. But for frontend, it's probably not so common. So we needed to figure out how to apply that patch and compile the code and everything. Gatsby is also not generating page directly, but it's keeping some data during render time in its internal GraphQL. So it's not going to Drupal every time when you ask for some data, but it's going only to its internal GraphQL. And then when it has all data in GraphQL, it fetches the data based on your React templates and React components and produces your nice and shiny static website. Because we use JSON API. If you don't know what JSON API, it's kind of linked API. So you have some root resource, and this root resource contains links to all sub-resources. And then these sub-resources again contain either links to another resources or they contain raw data. You can see it here that this ID is raw data, it's some string, but this links area ref is linked to another resource. So if I would fetch this link, I would again receive another list of links or list of data. To make our front-end developers happy, we had to modify this default output a little bit because Drupal and its APIs, it's quite chatty, so it's outputting unnecessary data, and also some fields are just impossible to figure out which data you want to use. So we had to modify these default outputs, and first we used JSON API extras module, which is good for simplifying, for example, body fields. So you have summary there, you have process there, and you have format there, but really you are interested only in process. So you can do that with JSON API extras. Then there are normalizers, and this can be suitable for simpler modifications like, I don't know, removing something based on regex. And then there are some more advanced techniques like computed field and custom API resource. If you want to learn more about how to modify these JSON API outputs, you can watch session which I already gave for Decoupled Drupal initiative. Marek will post link to chat. And let's talk about search now, because when you are dealing with search in Drupal, you just add Solr container to your setup, and then add Search API module, Search API Solr module, and that's it. You just style some views and you are done. But with Decoupled Web, that's not possible. So there are basically three options. The first one is that you will use some third-party service, and this third-party service can be Solr hosted somewhere else, or services like Algolia. We didn't use this integration because we didn't have a lot of experience with that, and our front-end team didn't as well. The second option is that you will expose your search API through API, but that was an option for us because our Drupal is running on VPN, so front-end isn't communicated with Drupal in real time. So we went for the last option, which is static front-end search. And in general, these are working that you generate some giant JSON, and then you are searching in this JSON. And if you want to modify this data, you need to do it on front end. So that's not something easy to be done, and it wasn't a pleasant experience, at least for me. We started with Lunar.js library, but we found out that it's mixing our languages, so we later switched to Minisearch, and this had also performance implications, so the search was much faster, and we were able to style it as we wanted. Now let's talk a bit about DevOpsy part, because we had to host it somewhere, and somehow we wanted to reuse the same containers from our local development up to production. So for the local development, we decided to use Docker, and we wrote Docker compose files. The only limitation here was that we had to use MS SQL for the database, because the government cloud, they already had licenses for MS SQL, and if we would want to use MariaDB or MySQL, then it would be extra cost for them. So that was for Drupal. And for Gatsby, it was different because Gatsby comes with a built-in server. So that was, again, a no-brainer. For staging, we use standard VPS. So we actually didn't use our Docker containers here. And we had VPS, I don't know, several cores, and it was provided by Czech company LindCZ. We built our artifact on GitHub Actions, and we later deployed it again using GitHub Actions, but we used a library called deploy PHP deployer. And this library is interesting because it allows you to do kind of blue-green deployment. So you are not overriding current version on the server, but you check out the new, then try to update your database, and only if that's successful, something will change on the server, and it will start working with the new version of the code. For production of Gatsby, we already had to go for cloud, and the cloud is Azure. So for server, we use Azure Blob Storage, which is something like S3 buckets on AWS. So you just drop your data, and then it is automatically served. For build process, we were still building on the GitHub Actions. So we did Gatsby build there, and we committed it to repository, and then there was cron running and picking it, cron running on Azure DevOps and picking it from that branch. This was quite successful because immediately after launch, which was on 6 November around 8 p.m., the server already had over 4 million hits, including all assets and stuff. So it's quite good, I would say. For hosting of the Drupal, again, we are at Azure, so we used Azure Kubernetes Engine, and we were building these images completely on Azure And also the whole Kubernetes pipeline was running on Azure DevOps. And now over to Marek to finish it with some statistics.
Exactly. So just to give you a bit more idea of who was actually using the system and who was working on it. So we had 7 editors and correctors who were working on the data for the whole platform, and 6 people who were translating it to English. In the end, about 26 developers were working on the code to get it done, and within the first 3 weeks after launch, we had about 7 million page views. So it seems like the platform was broadly accepted, and it's still to this day being used by the government as the main source of the information for the people. So it's even being referenced by the other governmental sites. We had about 120 volunteers working on it, so it was a big group of people, and I hope there was appreciation from the government side as well. So I believe we have done something which was really useful to a lot of people. And that's it from our presentation. Oh, no, it's not it yet. Sorry, my bad. Just quickly to give you an information about where we are today. So we have implemented that PES, the semaphore epidemic system, which is actually not even being used anymore. And we have handed over the project to NACIT, to the National Agency for the Information Technologies, and we have added some information about the vaccination so that the people can, sort of see this directly on the page when they visit it. And that's the end of the presentation. Thanks a lot, and we will check the questions and answers for some questions because we still have a little bit of time to answer those. Miro, do you want to pick up something?
Yeah. Let's start from the top. How did you find integration with Drupal and Azure DevOps? That was thankfully not on our shoulders, but just because we were running MS SQL, it wasn't easy. Because Azure pricing is a bit weird, and they are charging you for they have database tiers based on number of parallel connections, and as you know, Drupal isn't. I would say Drupal is relying on database. There are 400 requests just for some pages, so that was a bit hard.
I'm gonna pick up the last one. If you were to do the same project but rendered by Drupal, not decoupled, what would the cons be? I would say that it's making the security a bit harder because this way we were able to run the Drupal behind VPN, and it was sort of really hard to even get to it, not to talk about hacking it. And also we were able to work on the front end completely separately from the Drupal implementation. So the team didn't really have to understand Drupal in any way. And of course, there are other ways of doing that as well. But that simply allowed 2 teams to work sort of separately in a very tight time frame. Miro, do you want to pick up another one?
Yeah, there is question about where is the site running. It's covid.gov.cz. I'm just sharing the site now. It looks a bit different because, as Marek said, vaccination was added in January, sometime in January. And maybe to show you a whole workflow, how people are working with the site. So you have some live situations here. And I don't know if I would just say that I business activities and then I'm interested in some compensations. So you will find the topic, or let's search for wedding. And we found 7 live situations. So you can check wedding and then photographers because you want to have photographer at your wedding, and then maybe some tourism because a lot of people are coming to have wedding in Czechia, and yeah, then all the stuff related here. Was there any other question? Yeah, there was question if you can show more about the entity you created to handle translations.
I guess we can maybe handle that one separately, Jean-Francois. If you want, just drop us a message and we can talk about it. It would be a bit more difficult to discuss it like this, but generally it's a plain custom entity with a couple of fields, and that's it.
Yeah. Another question. Do you have any issues with Drupal and MySQL? Just bit on Azure, but I don't think there were any issues. And that's also the reason why we decided to stick with core, because we hope that core shouldn't contain any custom written queries as you might find in some contrib modules.
Yeah, there were really very few contrib modules in the project when we finished.
Yeah.
There's another question: how do you balance between granular requests versus big requests? So that didn't really apply to us a lot, I would say, because we were generating the HTML as a static website. So we went for no requests, really.
Or maybe this was from management point of view.
I don't know.
That was out of us, but
if you want, ask the question again with a bit more specific stuff.
Yeah, or maybe ask to join us here and we can discuss it.
Exactly.
But I think that we are over time, so we can keep answering your questions if you have any. But if that's it, then thank you for your attention and see you around.